Hello. Today is the last reading wrap up for 2020, even though we are seeing this in 2021. This is my December reading wrap up, and it was another incredibly fruitful reading month for me. I read 35 books. I actually was looking, and in the 12 months of 2020, I read more books than I've ever read for that month 5 times. So basically 5 times that month had the highest number of books I'd ever read in that month. So like 35 books is the highest number of books I've ever read in a December since I've been keeping track of my stats. And I think that was reflective of the fact that it's a weird year, lockdown, lots of reading time, and I apparently was making the most of it, including this month. I read 35 books, and it was a very mood reading driven month. I think that paid off. I had a lower average rating than I normally have, but I was very much enjoying, even if I wasn't rating things super high, I felt like I was reading what I was in the mood to read, so it felt like a good reading month. Anyway, I'm rambling. Let's go ahead and we will talk about kind of my stats overall. Then we will talk about my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits for the month of December. And then we can officially kick the dust off of our feet. Well, I do have, I guess, a couple more stats videos coming, but we're almost done talking about 2020 in its entirety. Okay, like I mentioned, I read 35 books this month. I read a total of 9,060 pages for the month with an average book length of 259 pages. Of those 35 books, 20 of them I owned and 15 of them I did not own. The books had an average age of 5 years, and they had been on my TBR for roughly 3.5 months on average. Paid for 22% of those books, and the average book cost of the books I read was $2.88. My biggest genre this month was fantasy, which was I guess makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. But yeah, fantasy, I read 9 of those. I read 8 what I would describe as speculative romance, so either sci-fi or fantasy or paranormal romance. I read 6 mysteries, 5 nonfiction books, 5 contemporary romances, a classic, and a couple of historical romance. So pretty typical mix of genres, though I did read more fantasy than I normally do. In terms of my ratings, very highly distributed to 3 stars and 3.5 stars. I gave 13 3 stars and 14 3.5 for an average book rating of 3.26 stars. So those are the stats. And then in terms of different challenges I met, so I actually did a lot of challenge reading. So I read 1 book from my classics TBR for 2020, which was Maurice or Morris from E.M. Forster, which we will talk more about. I also had that on my 5-star book prediction list. I also read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware, which was also on my 5-star prediction list. So I read both of these for that challenge. Our last We Need Diverse Romance pick of the year was Mangoes and Mistletoe by Adriana Herrera, which I gave 3.5 stars to, and I thought was really fun. I think that it was a little too insta-love for its tone. So I'm forgiving of insta-love if that's sort of like the tone of the book, if it's a little bit campy. This was a little more serious in its tone, so therefore the progression of not liking to love, I thought was a little bumpy, but it's a little steamy, which I liked. And I always am a sucker for kind of the grump and the sunshine dynamic. I thought that was handled really nicely in this book. So yeah, overall, this one was really fun, a good Christmas pick, and our last We Need Diverse Romance pick of the year. And then I did have 2 different secret TBRs going, so I can't tell you about those, but I did read things I was quote unquote supposed to be reading as a part of those secret TBR challenges. And then I read 5 arcs in December. So the one that I have in physical form is The Girl from Shadow Springs by Ellie Cipher. I read this one, which I'll talk to you guys more about here in a little bit. And then the other 4, I don't think I'm going to talk about more, so I'll say a little something here. I read Quiet in Her Bones by Nalini Singh, which I gave 3.5 stars to, and I thought was really well written. It just happened to not be my all-time favorite trope, and actually it reminds me a little bit of another book we're going to talk about, so maybe I'll hold the rest of my comments for there as a contrasting thing, but I still thought it was really well done. Just wasn't totally my favorite trope combo. A Lady's Formula for Love by Elizabeth Everett I thought was a really charming historical romance featuring a woman in STEM, and it's a romance between her and her bodyguard, who is trying to protect her because somebody is targeting her because of her scientific research she is doing for the British Crown. It was very whimsical and fun. I thought the plot itself was a little off, but I liked the characters and I liked sort of the writing and wit of it. Meant to Be Immortal by Lindsay Sands was fine. It's an Argento vampire book, and I said I wasn't going to read any more of these, but I like them, okay? I still enjoy them. I think quality-wise, they're not the best at this point, but it's just a fun, pleasant time. So if you like Argento books, you're gonna like this one. And then The Project by Courtney Summers was really high quality. Again, it ended up, I can't really tell you what happens in it that wasn't totally for me, but it was again a trope thing that it didn't end up being quite my favorite trope combo, but I really thought that it was well done. It is about, I guess it's sort of YA. I think it's like Sadie where it's masquerading as YA. I would argue that the protagonists are a little too old for that, but they're certainly young still. And it's a pair of sisters who got drawn into this cult in upstate New York. One of them is out, one of them is still in, and the one who is out is trying to do a investigative reporting piece on the cult and trying to kind of get back in contact with her sister. And it revolves around the suicide of this young man. I really did like this one, but again, I can't tell you the twists that happened that I didn't love. So that was the thing that kind of held me back. But I think if you like Courtney Summers, you will like this book. It's her normal, like super well written, very, very dark version of YA mystery thriller. And I think those were all of the challenges. I talked about that more than I normally do, but there you go. It was a challenging kind of month. So let's go into my disappointments. I actually have two, and I don't have a ton to say about either of them. The first is Deep Dark from Laura Griffin, and this is in her Tracer series. This was fine. I gave it 3 stars. The reason I put it down as a disappointment is that I am starting to wonder if I only am meh on most of Laura Griffin's books. Like there's a few of them I've read from her that I absolutely just totally enjoyed, like Touch of Red. That's the one that I always recommend to people. I really love that version of a police procedural with a strong romantic element, like their suspense kind of books. I really liked that one, and I have liked a couple of the other ones a lot in the Tracer series, but a lot of them are just kind of blah to me. And I'm starting to wonder if that's just going to end up sort of being the case overall. I still have a few more I want to read, so I'll try to reserve judgment, but I'm just bummed because it was fine. I liked the plot of this one. I'm even struggling to remember because it was just so blah. What was this one? Oh yeah, there's like a There's a serial killer who is using like technology basically to enable his serial killing. And I liked the story, but the characters I just thought were kind of forgettable, and I did not care about the romance at all, so I just wish it wasn't there. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see what my future with Laura Griffin is. And then the other one I wanted to mention as a disappointment because it has a lot of promise in the premise. It just didn't get executed very well. A Nurse for the Wolfman. Basically, this is a speculative romance where there is a secret lab who is trying to change the DNA of wounded veterans, or just like they're changing people's DNA to try to give them more animalistic qualities. So it ends up kind of turning them into shifters, and they have this like remote base that they bring in like these outside medical professionals to, including nurses. They don't really tell them what's going on or what the whole thing is, but they pay them really well, so they'll come and do like a 6-month stint kind of thing. And the thing that just like, I think that's a cool idea, and it's a romance, so like it's between the nurse and one of the patients. And I just hated the hero so much. He was so insufferable and just such a caricature of, I don't know. I just thought it was really unsuccessful, that character, and it brought the entire, I couldn't even have like fun, campy delight in it because he was just such a bummer. Also, I don't know what this train is doing. Can you hear this train? It is like laying on its horn. So that was my other disappointment I wanted to mention. But yeah, like I mentioned, nothing too awful this month, just some things that worked better than others for me. So I didn't feel like there was a lot that was truly disappointing. Moving into surprises, I did have 4 that I wanted to talk about. Just go down the pile here. So first, Mad and Bad Real Heroines of the Regency by B. Koch. I thought that this was a really engaging way to have basically like short biographies of notable or undersung heroines of the Regency era in England. I think if you are looking for a detailed history of the Regency, like this is not it. This really reads sort of like a collection of small, short biographies of these women. And that surprised me. I thought I was going to get a little bit more just like what society was like in this period. So it just wasn't quite what I thought I was getting from the book. I guess maybe what I mean is I thought there would be a little bit more analysis in this book, and a lot of it is biography, but she, I think, very skillfully chooses which women she's going to include. So it's filled with interesting stories about interesting women, some of whom I had heard of, some of whom I had not. But I really appreciated just like how this really tried to spotlight the women themselves, even if that wasn't quite what I was expecting. So I think if you're expecting more analysis, you're not going to get into this book. But I think especially with all the discussion right now around Bridgerton and quote unquote historical accuracy, which I have an entire video essay coming about here in the next, I guess, six weeks or so. I have a lot of thoughts on that. And if you are looking for something to remind you that historical accuracy is like a fool's errand, I think this is the kind of book that does a lot of good work in the world. So I appreciated this. It wasn't quite what I was expecting, but I still enjoyed it. Then we can go to Maurice or Morris, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And this was so surprising to me because I thought that, well, I guess what I ended up liking best about this wasn't really the novel itself. So if you don't know, Maurice, I'm just gonna call it Maurice. I know some people say Morris. Maurice was written in, I think like 1917-ish, like in the 19-teens or 20s by E.M. Forster, who was himself a queer man. And it is about a variety of different love stories or encounters between our main character Maurice and the men in his life. So basically this is like a gay love story from the early 1900s. I really enjoyed this almost as essentially like a primary source document from this period of history, because just seeing the way that Maurice's psychology is described and how that psychology is then interacting with the world around him and what is expected of him from the society in which he lives, I thought that was very interesting and very engaging. In terms of this as a book unto itself, I don't know that it's as successful as the other E.M. Forster works I have read. So for instance, I think Howard's End is a much better novel. And I'd actually heard that from some people of saying like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's his best work. And I get what people are saying now. In particular, I think the way that he progresses time in this book feels very kind of herky-jerky to me. I really love the statement of the ending, but I don't know that he did all of the kind of groundwork needed to make it feel as earned as I wanted it to feel. But I really loved reading his sort of author's note at the end, explaining why he made some of the artistic choices he made. I was very moved by that. And again, just sort of as a primary source of document, I very much enjoyed my time with this, but it just surprised me because I was expecting to love it as a novel. And that's not really the primary enjoyment that I got from reading this. I would still recommend it though. I think it's just interesting. It's an interesting window into this time period. Then we have The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. So I gave this 3.5 stars. I had hoped this would be a 5-star book and it's not, but I'm fascinated by this book because I can see why people both love it and hate it. And I feel like I fall somewhere kind of in the middle. I do not like the characterization of the main character's mental state, because the main character is portrayed as being unreliable and you, the reader, are aware that you may be losing time with the main character. And in that way, to contrast this against Quiet in Her Bones, because that is also a big feature of that book, I thought Nalini Singh handled the psychology of the character in that one with that kind of element to the plot or the characterization or the story or however you want to put it, where you're losing time with the main character and therefore you know they are unreliable. I thought she was much better skilled in kind of having that be a part of the main character in that book. There were other parts of that book I didn't enjoy as much as what I liked in this one, but I thought the actual execution of that part of the way the main character and the narrator is working was better in Quiet in Her Bones. That is really the weakness in this, is the way the main character is set up to tell the story. So I get why for some people just that alone would be a total deal breaker. But what I really like is I think I'm learning, at least from the 2 Ruth Ware books I have now read, we share a lot of our sensibilities in terms of other elements that we like in mysteries. And I liked the overall direction that this book went a lot. Like I really liked the ultimate story of this. So the plot tropes really worked for me. The setting totally worked for me. If you don't know, it's basically kind of an isolated closed circle mystery where everybody is on this like luxury boat yacht thing. Our main character thinks she saw somebody die, but nobody believes her. And we go from there. So I really liked ultimately where that story ended up going. I loved the setting and kind of the rarefied rich people elements of it. It did remind me a lot of Christie, and I like that. I've not seen that very often in modern mystery thriller writers, and I'm excited that I feel like Ruth Ware has more of that in what she does than a lot of contemporary mystery thriller authors do. So that I very much enjoyed. But again, I didn't end up loving or hating this one. It had a little something extra to me that made me like it better than other mystery thrillers that I've read recently. I definitely, for instance, like this a lot better than I liked either of the Lucy Foley books I read, but I can see why this is so divisive now that I've read it. So a surprise. I wasn't sure. I was hoping I was going to love it, which I didn't, which is too bad. So I guess in some sense it's a disappointment, but I still was very intrigued by what I read, and I am definitely curious to continue on with her backlist. So yeah, surprise overall. And then the last surprise I wanted to mention was Bridget's Bane by Ruby Dixon. This was the latest entry in Ice Planet Home, which is the spin-off series of Ice Planet Barbarians. And this one surprised me because we finally are getting Bridget and Atem's book, and oh my gosh, they have been causing so much drama and bullshit in the tribe for the last however many books, and I wasn't really sure that I was going to enjoy actually getting their story because what we've seen of both of them in previous books didn't make me like either of them. However, I will tell you, I was very pleasantly surprised, and I'm happy to tell you that this ended up being pretty much a deconstruction of the miscommunication trope in a romance. Ruby Dixon very clearly is trying to show, here is all of the miscommunication that has happened between these people, and here is how they've gotten to a point where they like are at an impasse, and even though both of them really do kind of want to be together, they cannot have enough of a meeting of the minds to talk through and like get to a place where they could actually be together without some outside help. And in this book, we get Ice Planet couples therapy, and I loved it. It was funny for one thing because, you know, these blue alien men trying to understand what therapy even is was very funny. But then I also just appreciated that we had a romance where it's not just enough that we love each other, like we actually have to figure out how to communicate and talk to each other for this relationship to work. So I was surprised, and she totally sold me on them as a couple. I liked both of them a lot by the end of the book. Well, actually more Bridget than Atem, I have to say. I still felt like he was a little bit of a smug, pretty boy who's always gotten everything he wants in life, but I was more into him by the end. I felt like he truly wanted to make things work, and I appreciated that. So anyway, she totally surprised me at how much she sold me on this book. It was I think that there was a little fad at the beginning of the book that could have been trimmed out to make it better, but overall I thought this was a really fun entry in the series. Okay, and now we can move to my hits. So I talked about two of these in my mid-month check-in, so I won't really say much about them other than I still consider them to be hits. First was The Girl from Shadow Springs by Ellie Cipher. This is a YA post-apocalyptic fantasy, and if you are looking for something that is going to give you nice wintry vibes, because it's sort of a retelling of a Snow Queen kind of myth, this is definitely, I think, a good one for that. So it comes out in February. Really enjoyed this one. I thought it just hit my mood perfectly when I read it, basically. And then the 5th volume of Monstrous, I would also still consider to be a hit. We kind of are on a little bit of a side quest, but really this series is so kind of meandering. Everything is a little bit of a side quest, but it was one I enjoyed, and definitely am looking forward to whatever happens next to our intrepid gang of little demigods who are running around this very interesting world. And then a couple that I did not talk about in my mid-month check-in. So first, I read A Dead Djinn in Cairo by P. Djeli Clark, which I think has just cemented for me that P. Djeli Clark is gonna be a new favorite author. This is 43 pages. It is a short story. I mean, yeah, it's a short story. It's not even a novella, but it's the first story in a series from P. Djeli Clark. There is one that's already out. I have that ebook, and I'm definitely gonna read it, hopefully this month. And then a full novel in this series comes out, I think in April, May, sometime this spring. And I am so into this series, guys. It is basically a police procedural, but set in ye olde fantasy version of Cairo, where the Jinn and Ifrit and angels and all of them. There's been like a rip in the seam between our worlds, and they have come into our world. So there's now magic in this universe. And our intrepid detective is sort of like a dandy, like a lady detective. She's queer. She is a very foppish dresser. And this first story is her investigating a dead djinn and kind of what that portends for the future of the city of Cairo and our world as we know it. And it just, much like Ring Shout, so much world building is packed into so few pages, so much characterization, and a full rollicking plot. Now, was this as good as Ring Shout? No, I think it just didn't have as much time fully developed, so I wouldn't say it's as good, but it is so full of promise, and it's just so my jam. Like, we've got fun speculative element, we've got a mystery plot, and we've already got insinuations of a romantic side plot. These are the things that I love most in books, and if you put them all together, it's just gonna be for me. So, I'm very much looking forward to continuing. Peter Jelly Clark, I just want to read everything he's ever written, basically, now, because I just love what he does. So that was definitely my second biggest hit. But my first biggest hit are the three of the Percy Jackson books I finished. I did finish some other things in the Rick Riordan verse. All right, and I guess one of these is not Percy Jackson. I should say the three Rick Riordan books I finished this month. So I would say of the three, I gave The Titan's Curse, which is the third book in Percy Jackson, 4 stars. But I thought it was really fun and to me, The Titan's Curse really leveled up from the first 2 books and was like, oh, okay, I'm really intrigued by where this is going. Like, this really is expanding kind of what I thought was possible in this universe. This is one where basically one of our main characters is missing, and everybody is going on a quest to get that person back and to thwart the big bad. And in the course of that, we are introduced to 2 really key new characters. And just, it's a very interesting version of a fantasy quest plot aimed at young readers. It just went places I wasn't expecting it to go. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. Then I read The Battle of the Labyrinth, which is the 4th book. I gave this 4.5 stars because this was just fantastic. And it pulled off a twist I didn't see. Maybe I was just dumb, but I didn't see the twist coming, and I thought it really added to the book. I think that this really went places I wasn't expecting a middle grade series to go. It suggests a lot of really interesting things about the Percy Jackson world that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it just has so many great character moments. Like, first of all, I am an absolute sucker for Tyson. He has my entire heart. So I loved all, like, his, kind of like learning that heroes maybe aren't all you think that they're gonna be, but then also you can inspire people. Like, I love that. I loved Grover and his search for Pan, and like the payoff of that I thought was really great. I really loved where this moved, like how this moved the macro plot along. I thought all of that was really, really interesting. And by the end of this, we have one more book in this original series. It's a 5-book series, and this was the 4th book. So I am so excited for this 5th book to see how this first kind of conflict gets resolved. And then I'm also really intrigued to see the spin-off series, which has also got some of these main characters, but also new characters. Like, I'm just so excited to see where this whole Camp Half-Blood / Percy Jackson bit is going. So this was 4.5 stars. I absolutely love this. And I would say this is probably my favorite book of the month. The other Rick Riordan book I read was The Sword of Summer, which is the first Magnus Chase book, which is, I believe, a trilogy. And it was written, I believe, in 2015. I loved this book. I thought it played with structure in a really interesting way. Now, I will tell you, it needed to have some of its middle trimmed out, I think, and I can't really get into talking about what in this book I love so much because it would be spoilers. But the first part of it, like the setup of it, is it's very similar to Percy Jackson, but it is with Norse mythology. And I thought his very purposeful posture towards inclusion was wonderful. And I think what it suggests is that he is an author who continues to change and grow, think through what he wants to represent in his books, how he wants to talk to young people who are the audience that he is writing for. And I just really loved this book. I thought it was really fun, really smart. Like I said, it did have, I think, some flab in the middle, which, kind of weighed it down a little bit, but I thought the payoff of it made all of that worthwhile. And it just was a really fun book. I really enjoyed it. I liked that our protagonist was already a little bit older. So this is, I think, probably more young YA than it is middle grade, really, the Magnus Chase book. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And I wasn't sure how I would do with a different series from the same author. So all that to say, I think I'm waiting to find out how this last book goes, but I'm wondering if I'm gonna end up saying that this is better than Harry Potter. Right now, I think I'm inclined that way. And I'm excited to read the Kane Chronicles from Rick Riordan. Like, I'm into it. I am on the Uncle Rick train. Choo choo. Let's do this. Let's go. So that was definitely the highlight of my reading month, was all of my Rick Riordan time. So yeah, I think that will do it for me for December. 2020, goodbye. See ya. Thank you for all the great books, but we're moving on. And yeah, let me know what your favorite thing that you read in December was. Maybe let me know the last thing you read in 2020. And yeah, that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye.